let's do it.
Okay. For the second time reporting the story of Robert Farquharson, Ruby and I find ourselves standing on the side of the highway outside Barwon Prison near Geelong. It's this flat, featureless plain with a few gum trees on the side of the highway. And the reason we're on the side of the highway and not in the car park is because at Barwon Prison, you're not even allowed to park in the car park if you don't have business in the prison. About 20 metres away, a security guard sitting in a car staring at us. She's making sure we don't even creep over the threshold. Across that road, beyond the car park, Barwon Prison is a set of grey concrete walls which tower over everything. Inside those walls is a man we've never met, but who I've spent years thinking about. 2 juries found that man guilty of basically being a monster, of murdering his own 3 children to get back at his ex-wife. Suspects often don't give evidence in criminal trials, but in Farquharson's second murder trial, he got in the witness box to try to convince the jury he was innocent. People say his case never recovered. And that's always made me so curious about him and how he would tell his own story. Is there something about him that just exudes guilt or innocence? What was it that the jury saw that we haven't been able to see? You know, we've made so many requests to Corrections Victoria to try and get in to see him and interview him. They've been turned down, and that's always felt like a bit of a lack in telling this story. And no, we're not here today because Corrections Victoria has finally agreed to let us speak to Farquharson. I wish. All we've still got to rely on are the few pieces of communication we've had and his connections. We've had a letter from him. We've spoken to his proxies, Anne Irwin and Chris Brook, but we don't have his voice. So that's why we're standing on this roadside today. We're here to meet one of those proxies, Chris Brook. Good morning. How are you going?
Fine.
Good. Chris is an astrophysicist. We met him much earlier in the series. He's an Australian scientist living in the Canary Islands in Spain. And a bit over 10 years ago, he got so obsessed with Robert Farquharson's case that he wrote a book about it. He called it Road to Damnation. And he was really the first one to question the threads of evidence that saw Farquharson convicted for triple murder on Father's Day in 2005. Chris's obsession also means that when he's on holidays in his old hometown, he spends some of it here, visiting Barwon Prison. We couldn't pass up the chance to meet him in person. So, tell us what you're here to do today.
Come to visit Robert Farquharson. Yeah, it's been a long time. Haven't seen him before COVID. I've been here a couple of times, so I'm just going to drop in and see how he's doing.
Chris says when he does come in, he's always struck that while the world barely thinks about this bloke anymore, Farquharson is kind of stuck in those events from so long ago.
He went in 15 years ago and he hasn't been able to move on at all. So his mindset is just back then. And, this thing still goes around in his head. And it's the most horrific thing that can happen to anyone, losing their 3 kids. And so I'm just here to give some support and hopefully a little bit of hope and something.
So while Chris is inside, in a place we can't get to, we thought we'd get him to ask some questions for us.
Okay, yeah. I can ask them.
From the newsrooms of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, this is Trial by Water. I'm Michael Batchelard, and this is our 3rd bonus episode, Farquharson Inside. An hour and a half after he's disappeared behind those high concrete walls, Chris emerges and makes the trek back out to the highway. So, how'd you go in there?
Went okay. Rob said they saw you out here, the prison.
Yeah.
And so
practically the first thing Chris tells us shows that it wasn't our imagination that we were under scrutiny.
Yeah. And so before I spoke to him, he'd spoken with the director of the prison, had said, "What's going on? There's some people out there."
The second thing Chris says addresses one of our questions for Farquharson. Given the opportunity, would he actually want to talk to us? And Chris had to admit that even though Farquharson does want to do an interview, the idea makes him a little nervous.
there are risks because, he's in with murderers and, there's some people occasionally you could get who wants to make a name for themselves.
It's getting loud on the side of the road, so we get into the car.
Should we jump in the car before you get
Okay.
I'll get you.
As we do this, I'm thinking about the repeated requests I've made to the prison system to allow us to interview Farquharson. It's legal to talk to a prisoner. They have a right to have their voice heard. But in Victoria, the prison system almost always finds a reason to say no. Some other reporters have got around this ban by going in as visitors without declaring who they are. Others have taped prisoners' phone calls or video conferences with friends. But Farquharson's friends won't do that. They say he's a cautious man.
If something happens and he gets put into lockdown because he's at risk of some point, and they put you in isolation for protection, right? If you're at risk. So that's something he did bring up that does scare him.
It's also obvious that Chris thinks he's a good guy.
He asked about your family. That's the first thing he asked. So, yeah, he's what you would call a good guy in your communities. Generally, that's how he comes across, And I think that's how he was considered before all this went down. Yeah.
Chris says that Farquharson keeps going back over the evidence that convicted him. He thinks about what he sees as a betrayal by his mate, Greg King. You'll remember King was the one who told police Farquharson announced a whole murderous plan in detail at the fish and chip shop one Friday night, a few months before the crash.
He's never been able to understand how Greg King got manipulated. He thinks he got manipulated by the police and really got sold down the river, basically, and started to believe that Farquharson did it. But yeah, he's thinking about the case a lot, always. He's got ideas about maybe what should be looked at because, he's stuck there. That's his life. This case, he's stuck in 2005, basically. And the people surrounding and the people that gave evidence, they're the main players in his life. They're his life story.
Has he listened to the podcast?
He hasn't. He's not allowed to. I mean, they don't have the equipment. So he's about, as he said, we're about 20 years behind here. We don't have any of that stuff.
No internet?
No internet, just the basic channels.
Right.
Yeah.
But has he...
He's seen the 60 Minutes show that was a bit, associated with the podcast. And some other prisoners saw it and he said the reaction was good, generally. Even some of the screws, he said.
Screws. That's what prisoners call the guards. And I'm a bit surprised at this, so I ask more. It turns out some of the guards had picked up something we revealed in episode 3, that, according to her own words, one witness, Dawn Waite, could not have been at the dam at the time she said she witnessed Farquharson driving into it. She told us she was at a noodle shop in Colac, 30 minutes away. Some of the guards said to him,
"What? That Dawn Waite, she's getting chicken chow mein or whatever it was. What's that?" So he said it was mainly, basically, all positive reactions from prisoners and some screws, he said. Yeah.
So when you say positive reaction, do you mean that they think that maybe he shouldn't be there?
Yeah, like some of them were saying, you'll be getting out, yeah. So, absolutely.
It's worth saying here that during the series we explored how memories are not as reliable as we all think they are. And I'm pretty sure that Dawn Waite and Greg King both believed what they said about Farquharson was true. Anyway, these issues are going to be explored at an appeal that everyone's expecting will be lodged soon. So, obviously there's an appeal planned, but it seems to be taking its time. Is that source of frustration for him?
Absolutely, yeah. He asks about it a lot. So it's frustrating that everything takes so long. It's a very long process and there's so much evidence to go through and you only get one more shot at it, right?
Chris is a great proxy for us. He's smart. Farquharson's comfortable with him. And he clearly really likes the man he's just been in to see. But he's also a practical guy, a scientist. So when we ask Chris how he feels when he's in front of a man serving 33 years in prison, well, he struggles a bit.
That's a hard one, sorry. I mean, you get a sense of, I just comes into your mind about this guy's been in here 15 years, so it's definitely a bit overwhelming in that sense. So, just a bit daunting of, this terrible place that I'm in, and this guy's in here. Well, I hope I can give him hope. That's the main thing I'm thinking about.
All this time, I'm thinking, I wish I was the one in there talking to Farquharson. And I'm asking myself why this seems so important to me. Perhaps it's that, like most of us, I think I can assess his character through his words and how he delivers them. Maybe I could, or maybe I'm deluded. Either way, I'd like the chance. The last time Farquharson told his story publicly was in his second trial, when his lawyer called him to give evidence. We don't have a recording of that, but the author Helen Garner sat through the whole case and wrote the definitive book about it. We talked about her book a lot through the series. She wrote that Farquharson's testimony was so bad that the defence case never recovered. She described him as a poor animal who needed putting down, and a wretched man blundering his way through the scorched earth of his story. We're sitting in a car on the threshold of the prison where 15 years later, the same wretched man is now living the scorched earth of his life. So I asked Chris, is there something about him that, just exudes guilt or makes him unlikable or unconvincing?
Is he not very eloquent? Is he not very good in telling his own story? Is he a bit dumb, maybe?
Chris says no. That's just the way he came across in court. And he reckons that says more about lawyers than it does about Farquharson.
Yeah, well, that's the job of a prosecutor or a barrister, isn't it? I mean, that's their job, is to make people look bad, and, they're good at it.
It's what they're trained to do.
So they ask a series of questions that makes you look bad, and they find something that makes you look a bit bad, and they ask you that question over and over again. Like, for example, an irrelevant thing like, why did you turn off your headlights, right? And he hasn't got an explanation of why he turned off his headlights. But if you ask them 50 times, right, why did you do this? This doesn't make any sense, jury. Why would you do this? It's not surprising that an inexperienced witness is going to be made to look bad by a barrister, especially when your story is quite incredible. I mean, he's got an incredible story, and it's easy to make fun of it, basically.
But this is the system we have, the best system we have to come up with the truth. And he's, by any measure, he's failed that system.
Yeah. So, the way I like to look at it is, if you get 90% in an exam, you're doing pretty well, right? Usually everyone says, great job. If you get 90% of these court cases with this system that we've got correct, that's probably a realistic, good effort, and the system does work in most cases, but you're still getting 10% wrong, right? And that's quite a lot of people in jail that shouldn't be there. So let's find those ones we got wrong and let's do something about them.
When Helen Garner wrote her book, she talked about another character, a middle-aged woman. She was there in the court every day of the second trial. And this is how Garner described her during Farquharson's car crash testimony. All the while, Garner writes, Farquharson's person of comfort, the pretty motherly woman with her hands folded in her lap, or pressed as in prayer under her chin, seemed immune to the awful effect of his demeanour. She gazed up at him from her seat with a wonderfully tender-hearted expression of approval and encouragement. Garner goes on, she tilted her head, she nodded it slowly, thoughtfully, as if pondering the incontrovertible truth of everything he was saying. Once or twice she gave a tiny wink. She poured out upon him great streams of love from some inexhaustible Christian store. That inexhaustible Christian woman was Anne Irwin. Without her, Chris Brook would never have been able to write his book. She collected, checked and forwarded information. A decade later, she helped do the same for me. She's been one of Farquharson's most tireless advocates. For years, she's been visiting him in prison. And now finally, it's time for us to hear from her. That's after the break.
So let's go back to the start here, Anne. Let's tell us a little bit about you and how you became involved in this.
Okay, I became involved because my son was going out with Rob's niece, and we saw the accident on the television, and then a little while...
Ruby and I are sitting in the comfortable, softly furnished Geelong lounge room of Anne Irwin.
If you don't want the cushion there, you can take it off because your legs are longer than mine because it's pretty comfy.
That's all right. I've never...
There's floral print everywhere, a little table and bucket full of Lego for the grandchildren, and motivational Christian sayings in posters on the wall. One of them says, "Faith makes things possible."
What's your necklace, by the way?
It's
Anne's wearing a necklace depicting a mustard seed and a mountain. She explains that it's a symbol. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed,
you can move mountains, and it's from the Bible.
moving mountains is what Anne has been trying to do. To overturn the findings of two juries, the appeal court, the High Court, and the overwhelming weight of public opinion in Robert Farquharson's case. She's been doing this since before the first trial. The connection was that her son was going out with Farquharson's niece, and all three of them believed without any doubt that Farquharson was innocent. So together they embarked on a campaign.
You should have seen the campaign headquarters at our house.
Anne says it was quite something.
We started making badges and having this website to answer people's questions, expecting honest questions.
The website, called Fact Before Theory, became a forum for supporters and detractors of Farquharson to disagree furiously about the case through the comments section.
It really turned into a bun fight. Oh, he just deserves to rot. Australian jails are too soft and should be like that one where they have the prisoners in tents in the desert in Texas.
The point is, it got pretty willing.
It really turned into an awful situation.
Things have quietened down for Anne since then. But 15 years later, she's still trying to move that mountain. When I read out to her what Helen Garner wrote, she sort of misses the mocking tone.
While the wretched man blundered his way across the scorched earth of his story, she poured out upon him great streams of love from some inexhaustible Christian store.
Oh, wow. That's nice. That's actually...
Her reaction's kind of sweet, actually. It says a lot about her.
That's what you do if you're trying to support someone, try and really focus and, just really encourage. And he needed every bit of encouragement he could get in that courtroom, so...
Have you ever wavered in that support?
No, never. Absolutely never. Never.
Anne was there often during Farquharson's first trial, but in the second trial she was his official support person. She sat in court every day and in a chair close to the witness box when he was giving evidence. Each morning before the day's hearings, she would pray with him.
I would just pray that the truth would come out, that people would be honest, that God would overrule and that the trial would be a just one.
Did it ever challenge your faith, the fact that you'd prayed so hard and got not the result that you thought was just?
No. And I know even one time it had been a horrible, horrible day in court, and I just thought, this absolutely sucks. This sucks. This is not going well. And I got in the car and I always had Christian radio on, and the song that was playing when I turned the car radio on was The Voice of Truth, Tells Me a Different Story. And I thought, okay, I've just got to hang on to that.
Tells me a different story. The voice of truth says do not be afraid.
Unlike Chris, Anne lives near Barwon Prison. She talks to Farquharson on the phone almost daily and visits him once a month. They don't talk much about the case itself. It makes him anxious.
And we just talk about stuff that's in the news, Married at First Sight, because it's just a nothing show. No offence, Channel 9, but it's a nothing show that he's watching, I'm watching, we can discuss what's going on, and it's just nothing. So it's safe.
Farquharson's niece and Anne's son, the ones who ran the campaign from the living room, also keep in touch with him. They're married now with children of their own, but they're not allowed to bring them in to visit. Farquharson's a child killer after all.
No, it's deemed that it's not appropriate for Rob to have contact with children. However, in the visitor centre where we meet, there can be children of other prisoners there running around. So in some ways, I wonder if that's a strategic extra punishment meted out by whoever made that decision.
Inside, Anne says Farquharson's circle is pretty small.
He doesn't want to talk to people in prison, and he often says he looks for lockup, which is about 3 o'clock, I think. They have their dinner in prison about 3 o'clock. So, which is bizarre.
And how does he spend his time?
He washes the floors, keeps the kitchen clean and tidy, that sort of thing, because he likes things to be neat and tidy, and he can't concentrate and focus on reading. He used to like reading. He used to like watching football, but even that's he's just lost a lot of interest in a lot of things.
Why do you think that is?
I think because he's been in there for so long that he's pretty much lost hope. And that's why, even though everyone is mounting this campaign, he struggles to get excited about it.
Some people say that in prison, hope is the worst thing because it's the torture of believing that something better might come.
I think that is probably 100% true. Yep. But I think if you can make people give up all hope, the life goes out of them pretty much. If people don't have hope, there's nothing left.
Back when Farquharson was going through the court system, Anne saw it as her job to campaign, to fight. Even after the second guilty verdict in 2010, after he gave his infamous scorched earth evidence, she stayed angry, defiant. Anne stood outside on the steps of the Supreme Court in Melbourne, shaking in front of the media. She had a statement she wanted to read.
So, all right, well, I have this statement. And this was read in 2010 after the sentencing. On behalf of Robert Farquharson, his family, friends and supporters.
Only parts of it have survived in news footage, so I got her to read it again to me.
Robert Farquharson is innocent. We, as his family and supporters, are not so blinded
by love or sympathy that we would maintain his innocence if there was any evidence of guilt. Rob is a broken man, a traumatised and deeply grieving parent who loves his children. Despite the fact that it is hard to accept, this was an accident.
Those who have never experienced what he has cannot judge him. Walk a mile in his shoes and see how you would behave. Rob was never likely to receive a fair trial.
We feel deeply for his pain and suffering, and the fact that this is caused by a failure of the system meant to protect the innocent. This verdict and sentence affects all of us, and we await
the day that justice prevails and this brutally wronged father of 3 special boys walks free. We hope and pray that he can then find a way to recover from this ordeal and live with his grief. We are here to ensure this happens and offer him all the support he fully deserves.
And how do you feel reading that again?
Well, pretty emotional, really, because that's basically it in a nutshell. Yeah. So.
And reading that 14 years later, it rings as true to you as it did on the steps of the court that day?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
As for now, everything rides on the appeal.
What would happen to him, do you think, if the appeal was lost?
I don't want to say what I think.
Too distressing?
I have my thoughts on what will happen, and yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Trial by Water is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. It's hosted and reported by me, Michael Batchelard. Ruby Schwartz executive produced the series. She's also the head of investigative podcasts. Editing from Patrick Elliott, The Age's editor, and Matthew Dunkley, the deputy and investigations editor. Tom McKendrick is head of audio and video. Lisa Muxworthy is the head of growth content. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes and updates on the appeal as the case develops. Thanks for listening.